Hi everyone, Nicole Hanna here from Nicole Hanna Jewelry and YouTube's Go Art Yourself. Today I'm going to share with you how to make this pendant. The list of materials and tools are at the beginning. The 20 gauge round wire I will be referring to as base wires, and the 28 gauge round wire is a weaving wire. The weaving wire length is an estimation because I didn't measure it before I started. So you're going to cut your three 20 gauge base wires. Hold them parallel, ends even to one another, and cut your weaving wire. And just leave a small tail. Wrap the tail around the bottom base wire once or twice. And then you're going to take that weaving wire and coil it twice around the bottom two base wires. Pass it between the bottom two base wires and then coil twice around the top two base wires. And I'm starting about a centimeter left of center, but this weave later on can be shimmied along the base wires to center it. And then I'm just repeating the process. 2 coils around the bottom 2 base wires, and 2 coils around the top 2 base wires. And I'm going to do about 21 rotations of this weave. I call this the 2-2 weave. 2 coils around 2 wires twice. So I did about 21 rotations. And I'm taking my wire cutters and I'm just trimming the tail left off at the beginning. If you can feel that tail, just take your needle nose pliers and pinch that tail flush against the base wire that it's wrapped around. You just want to make sure that you can't feel any tail. So I'm, shimmy the weave along the base wires until the ends of those base wires are even with one another, like there's enough length on either end of that weave, an even length of wire. And then I'm just curving it into a half circle. And I'm going to take the inner right base wire and I'm going to bend that to the left. So I'm going to bend it towards the beginning of that weave. And I'm going to put a 12 millimeter round coin bead and shimmy it down so that it sits inside the curve of that weave. And I'm going to try to pass, take your pliers and bend the end of the wire that you pass through the bead until the 4 wires are parallel to one another at the beginning of that weave. I'm just trying to get my wires straight and smooth them through my fingers. And I'm going to try to pass the end of my weaving wire through the bead. Sometimes a 20 gauge base wire is a little bit larger, and the hole in your bead may not accommodate the passing of the weaving wire, at which point you'll have to cut the weaving wire and start it on the other end. But in this case, I'm able to shimmy it through the bead with a little work. It was a tight fit. So I'm just pulling the weaving wire all the way through. And I didn't have any plan when I started this project, so it's just kind of what evolved naturally, which is why the weaving wire length is an estimation, because I just added length as I needed it. So I've got that weaving wire through, so it's at the beginning of the 2-2 weave. And now with these 4 base wires at the beginning of that weave, I'm going to do more 2-2 weave, but with all 4 base wires instead of 3. So you're going to coil twice around the bottom 2 base wires, and you're going to coil twice around the next 2 base wires, just like you did with the 2-2 weave at the beginning. You're just including an extra base wire. So those are the middle 2, and then these are the top 2. And then you just pass your weaving wire behind all 4 base wires, and you start again. 2 coils around the bottom 2. 2 coils around the middle 2. And then 2 coils around the top 2. And you're going to do about 10 rotations of this. And I'm going to curve this a little so that this new weave kind of points up from the bead, or points away from the bead, I should say. And I'm going to do a weave on these bottom 2 base wires, so I'm just going to try to move the other ones out of the way a little bit. If they're getting in your way, don't be afraid to bend them out of the way. So I'm going to start by coiling 3 times around that bottom base wire. And then I'm going to coil 3 times around the bottom 2 base wires. So I call this the 3-3 weave, 3 1-wire coils, 3 2-wire coils. That's the 3 single-wire coils around the bottom, and then the 3 coils around both. And you could start with about 15, 20 rotations. I think I did 20 here, but you can add as needed. This is about 20.5 rotations. I like to end with the 1-wire coils because that's just those are tighter coils, and it keeps that weave from traveling or shifting along the base wires. Make sure your weaves are always nice and compressed. And then I'm going to curve this into a loop. You see how I bend it out a little bit first before I curve it? And that helps keep it centered where I want it. And ultimately, you want the weave to end at those 2 base wires on the opposite side of the bead. So I'm going to need a few more rotations of the 3-3 weave to get there. So I think total there's 23.5, 24.5 rotations of this weave. So I added 2 more, and it doesn't look like I'm going to have enough. So I think it did end up being 24.5 rotations. And I'm never afraid to bend those wires out of the way so that it's easier to add to my weaves. And I'm just going to bend the ends of that 3-3 weave around the 2 base wires at the end of the very first 2-2 weave. I'm coiling it all the way around. I'm going to trim the weaving wire because we're going to use it on the opposite end. And I'm going to start a coil around one of these 2 wires. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter which wire you choose to add the coil to. Just trying to get it into focus. My camera is not cooperating. And just coil, a couple centimeters to start. You can add coils as needed later on. And once your coil is established, you can trim that tail left at the beginning and discard it. Just make sure you can't feel any wire ends. So I've only coiled about 2 centimeters, I think. And now I'm bending both of those base wires down to follow the curve of that 3-3 weave. And the 1 bare base wire, I'm going to go ahead and just wrap the end of that around those 2 base wires at the end of the 2-2 weave. So I'm left with the coiled base wire, and you see those coils end about halfway down that 3-3 weave. What I'm going to do now is use that weaving wire and kind of latch those wires all together so that they don't separate from one another. So I'm going to wrap the weaving wire around the 3-3 weave. And you can wrap it around that bare base wire as well. In this case, I'm just wrapping it around the 3-3 weave so that all three of those wires really lay nice and flush against one another and they don't pull away from one another. And I settle that weaving wire nicely with one of the rotations of the 3-3 weave so you can't really see it. And once I've got it positioned where I like it, then I'm going to bring that weaving wire back up and add more coils to that coiled base wire. So you can't really see where it's latched, which is ideally what you want. And now I'm just going to keep adding coils until I reach the end of that first 2-2 weave. Really using the tip of my finger or my nail to push those coils close together. So I've added enough coils to reach the end. And I'm going to bend the end of that coiled base wire around those two same base wires. And I'm going to take the weaving wire, I'm not going to trim it, I'm just going to pass it along the back. The less wire ends you have to deal with, the better, I think. Now I'm coiling around the bottom base wire of the two that were just positioned. Oh, sorry, I'm coiling around the top base wire, coiling 3 times. So we're going to do another 3-3 weave here. So 3 single wire coils, 3 coils around both of those wires. Three single wire coils, and then 3 2-wire coils. It's about 15.5 rotations, maybe 20 rotations. I did not count. You can pause the video and count it if you like, or just start with 10 and add as you need. And then I just did a little clockwise spiral, a little clockwise loop there. And I'm going to curve it up to that 3-3 weave loop at the other end and add rotations of the weave as needed to reach that point. So trim your weaving wire. As you can see, I ran out of length here, so I will start a new length of wire. And then you're going to pass the ends of that 3-3 weave through that other 3-3 weave loop. Bend it around the back. Just make sure it's nice and secure. Before you trim any wires, make sure you like the positioning and the curve. I always like to take a little bit of time and really adjust everything and get it exactly where I want it before I trim any wires. So now I'm just going to trim excess from these 2 base wires. And you can discard the excess, and then I'm just going to use my pliers to really pinch those ends closed around that loop. So it's nice and secure and you're not going to feel any wire ends. And you can, if you want, as you're working on this last 2-2 weave or 3-3 weave, you can latch it to the other wires if you want. I find with a 20 gauge wire that you really don't need to. Now with those 2 shorter tails, I've added a coil to one of them. And I'm taking both the coiled and uncoiled wires and creating this spiral. Adding coils as needed to reach that base wire that passed through the bead. It's a little clockwise spiral. Now we're going to pass the ends of both of these wires between all those weaves and that bead, the base wire that's going through the bead. So both those base wires are wrapped around that bead base wire, the base wire that's passing through the bead. I'm going to trim off any excess and discard, and then pinch those trimmed ends closed. And then with the weaving wire, we're going to create another 3-3 weave. So we're going to start with the 3 single wire coils around the outermost wire, and then 3 coils around both of the remaining 2 base wires. Once you get your weave started, of course, trim any tail that you've left at the beginning. Make sure you can't feel any wire end. Keep the weaves always nice and compressed. So this is about 8.5 rotations, beginning and ending with those 1 wire coils. And I'm going to wrap this, curve it around those little spirals that we just did. So the end of the weave should reach that base wire passing through the bead. And then we're going to secure this weave in the same way that we did those other 2 base wires. So these wire ends are nice and snug around that base wire passing through the bead. I like to take some flat nose pliers and kind of pinch these spirals flat a little bit, especially with these thicker base wires. It makes it nice and stable and secure, and it really keeps these spirals and curls from moving out of shape. So give it a gentle pinch. You don't have to be afraid of pinching it. If you're afraid of marking up your wire, you can always wrap your piece in a nice soft cloth before you pinch it, and that'll keep you from marking up the wire with your tools. So we still have all this wire length, and I'm going to pass the end of the wire towards the back, the weaving wire. I'm going to pass it to the back. Just keep it attached. No, it's just another wire end you don't have to deal with later on. And I'm going to do more of a 3-3 weave. So the coils, the 1 wire coils are on the bottom of these 2 wires, and then 3 coils around both. So it's about 15 rotations, I think. And we're going to create a little counterclockwise spiral there. And I want this weave to reach the other end of that bead, so I will be adding more rotations of the weave. See how it kind of nestles in between the bead and the 2-2 weave? So just added a couple more rotations so that it reaches that base wire as it enters the bead. And then we're going to wrap the ends of these base wires around the base wire going through the bead. Around the back of that 2-2 weave. And you can even stop there if you want. You can stop at any point. If you like the result, you can stop at any point. But here I've continued to add a coil to one of the 2 tails of the base wires. And I'm taking both of them and spiraling them in a clockwise manner. And then kind of curving them along the inside of that last 3-3 weave. Just using my thumb to help position and get the shape right. Add coils as needed to reach that opposite end of the bead. And then you can trim your weaving wire and discard the excess, or save it if you have enough to put to use. So I'm just making a little bit of room because I want to pass both of these tails behind that little loop, the 3-3 weave loop. And then I'm going to pinch that loop down flat again. And then bend the ends around the loop to really secure it and trim any excess. Now, like I said at the beginning, these lengths were guesstimations. So I would suggest, because you can see I have very little wire length left. So I do suggest, maybe starting with 34 centimeters instead of the 32 that I have listed, just so you're sure that you have enough length to complete the steps. Just using my pliers and pinching things down flat. I am never, I'm never afraid of the wire. I'm never afraid to pinch it, or most things can be fixed. That's my philosophy. It's just wire. Most things can be fixed. So just have fun with it and experiment. Now I'm just taking a jump ring. I made this out of 14 gauge wire around a 10 millimeter mandrel. Just made a coil and then trimmed off each individual loop for jump rings. So then I'm just adding a jump ring to the 3-3 weave loop, making sure that jump ring is nice and closed. And there you have it. You have your finished pendant. It ends up measuring, I think, about 4.5 centimeters in length. So if you use smaller base wires, you'll end up with a smaller piece. But there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.